So, we hear it all the time, don't we? This narrative about America being so divided, left versus right, red versus blue.
It's the standard script.
Exactly. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's actually hiding a different kind of power struggle, one happening within the system?
That's pretty much the core argument Chris Hedges makes, isn't it? In, well, a lot of his writing looking at American power. It's a compelling, sometimes pretty stark viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've looked at a whole range of his stuff, actually, from about 2010 right up to 2024.
This is a pretty consistent perspective over more than a decade.
Right. And for you listening, if you're trying to get a handle on the big forces shaping things without, drowning in jargon, we're going to really zero in on two key ideas from Hedges:
Well,
corporatism and oligarchy.
okay.
Our mission here is just to unpack what he means by those terms, explore the impact he describes, and maybe, hopefully, spark some of those aha moments for you.
Sounds good. So getting right into it then. Hedges' central idea is that the main fight isn't really left versus right. It's this tension, this conflict between what he calls corporate power and oligarchic power.
A kind of internal clash within capitalism itself.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Playing out in politics, but the roots are deeper, according to him.
Okay, let's break that down. First, corporate power. He calls this housebroken capitalism. What does that mean? What does it look like?
Well, housebroken suggests something. Managed, predictable. Hedges argues this form of capitalism needs stability. It wants a reliable, often technocratic government. It relies on fixed rules like international trade deals.
Okay, predictable.
Think about industries with long-term investments, manufacturing, big agriculture. They need things to be relatively stable over time to make their money back and grow. They don't want constant upheaval.
Right, that makes sense. And who does Hedges identify as sort of representing this style?
He points to figures like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama in the U.S., and then internationally, people like Keir Starmer in the U.K. or Emmanuel Macron in France.
So established figures operating within that corporate framework.
Exactly. They work with and generally uphold that existing system.
And what about specific examples, policies or events Hedges links to this housebroken corporate power?
Oh, he has quite a list. Things like NAFTA, the trade agreement, which, many argue hurt domestic manufacturing. Also, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, that law separating commercial and investment banking. Some link its repeal to the 2008 crash.
Right.
And things like ending the fairness doctrine in media, but also broader trends. The huge expansion of the prison system, militarizing police forces, moving manufacturing overseas, growing national debt, neglecting infrastructure.
Wow. Okay.
And in his view, these all serve that corporate need for a certain kind of controlled, stable, albeit sometimes damaging environment.
Okay, so that's the housebroken side. Now, the other side of this coin, oligarchic power. Hedges calls this warlord capitalism. That sounds considerably less stable.
It really does, and that's the point. Warlord capitalism, and he describes it, actually thrives on instability, on chaos. It benefits from breaking down the administrative state, the rule.
So the opposite of the corporate types?
Pretty much. He calls it a kind of parasitic rentier capitalism. The goal isn't long-term building, necessarily. It's about setting up toll booths, he calls them, on essential things.
Toll booths, like charging fees.
Exactly. Controlling access and extracting maximum fees, maximum profit through manipulation rather than just production. It's more predatory.
So if corporatists like predictability, these guys, they actually like chaos. Who does he put in this camp?
Well, figures like Donald Trump, certainly Boris Johnson in the UK, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Modi in India, Orban in Hungary, Marine Le Pen in France.
Okay, a different kind of political figure.
Yeah, and their tactics often involve, deliberately sowing division, attacking established institutions, making things uncertain. Think about pushing ideas like the Great Replacement Theory or undermining alliances like the EU. Chaos can be profitable for them.
And where does Hedges see the engine room for this? What's driving this warlord approach?
He really focuses on private equity firms. Big names like Apollo, Blackstone, Carlyle Group, KKR.
Ah, private equity. Okay.
Their main goal, he argues, isn't building businesses for the long haul. It's about quick, massive profits.
How do they do that?
Well, the typical playbook, according to Hedges, is buy a company, load it up with debt the company has to pay back, not the firm then/costs aggressively.
Layoffs, cutting corners.
Exactly. Sell off assets, maybe the real estate, and then either sell the hollowed-out company quickly or sometimes just drive it into bankruptcy after extracting all the value.
Can you give a concrete example he uses?
Yeah, he often talks about KKR buying a big nursing home chain. The strategy, reportedly, wasn't about improving care. It was selling the actual buildings the homes were in.
Selling the real estate?
Yeah, and then forcing the nursing homes to pay huge rents back to the new owners, who were essentially KKR affiliates.
Wow.
The financial pressure became immense. Care quality reportedly suffered, and eventually the whole system went bankrupt. But the private equity firm, Hedges argues, walked away with profits from the property deals and fees.
That paints a picture, a very toll booth kind of picture.
Yeah, precisely. It illustrates that parasitic element he describes.
And Hedges also mentions specific individuals, maybe outside of politics, who align with this.
He does. He points to reporting, for instance, about figures in Silicon Valley like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel.
Okay.
The idea presented is that they've maybe soured on traditional politics and regulations and instead favor the disruption, the freewheeling, fortune-generating chaos of the tech world. Unregulated crypto, fighting taxes.
Right.
It fits the oligarchic mold, in Hedges' view. And he also notes big political donors, like Miriam Adelson, suggesting their contributions are often tied to seeking things like massive tax cuts for the super rich.
So what does this mean for everyday people? What are the consequences Hedges sees from this warlord style taking over?
Well, they're pretty widespread and often harsh. He points to the rise of the gig economy, precarious work, no benefits, the general decline of stable jobs with decent salaries and benefits, pension funds getting drained by high fees or risky investments,
Right.
and even direct impacts on health and safety, like those reports of higher death rates in nursing homes after private equity takeovers, often linked to staff cuts.
So you have these two styles, corporate, oligarchic, seemingly fighting each other. But Hedges says they also share some deep characteristics. He uses some pretty strong terms: totalitarian capitalism, or Sheldon Wollin's inverted totalitarianism.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
a crucial point. Despite their different methods, Hedges argues both ultimately lead towards something he calls totalitarian capitalism, or what Woolin termed inverted totalitarianism.
Okay, what does that look like?
It's a system where real democratic power fades away. You get mass surveillance. Unions are weakened or busted entirely. The media mostly serves the powerful. Dissent gets silenced, maybe even criminalized. Everything becomes a commodity, something to be bought and sold. Grassroots movements are squashed. The environment is destroyed for profit. Politics feels like a show, a distraction.
Like burlesque politics, he calls it sometimes.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you have massive debt keeping people trapped, wages stuck, while wealth flows upwards. So there are different paths, maybe, but Hedges sees them heading to similar destination. Power concentrated in very few hands, with the rest of us losing agency.
So the political fights we see every day, Hedges sees them as basically this internal civil war within the elite.
That's his argument, yes.
Yeah.
He really emphasizes that neither side, neither the corporate nor the oligarchic faction, truly serves the public interest or real democracy.
It's just about accumulating wealth.
Their main function, in his view, is funneling money and power upwards. They just have different tools and different immediate goals for, as he starkly puts it, disemboweling the country for the benefit of the billionaire class.
And this isn't just Hedges making this up now, right? He connects it to older ideas, historical thinkers.
Oh, absolutely. He draws a line back to Aristotle's idea of oligarchy government run by the rich. For the rich, not for the common good.
Right.
He connects it to Marx's critiques of capitalism's internal contradictions and exploitation. And as we mentioned, he heavily relies on Sheldon Wollin's concept of inverted totalitarianism, seeing it develop alongside corporate power's rise.
He also talks a lot about the failure of the liberal class, doesn't he?
Yes, that's central to his book, Death of the Liberal Class. His argument is that the traditional liberal establishment essentially failed. They stopped providing a real check on corporate power by gradually giving up radical critiques, becoming too comfortable with corporate money and influence. He argues they basically paved the way for the current situation by failing to defend democratic institutions and the working class effectively.
Is there a historical counterexample, a time when this kind of power was checked?
He points to FDR's New Deal. That was a direct response, he argues, to the crisis caused by unchecked oligarchic power during the Great Depression.
Right. Massive inequality then, too.
Exactly. But he's also quick to point out how many of those New Deal regulations and safety nets have been systematically dismantled over the decades since.
So if Hedge is right, and our choice is often between these two types of, as he puts it, rapacious capitalism, what does that mean when we vote?
Well, his conclusion is pretty bleak on that front. He argues that voting for either the corporate Democrats or the oligarchic Republicans, essentially, is choosing between two different flavors of the same exploitative system.
And all the other issues.
He tends to see many hot-button cultural issues, guns, abortion, etc., as largely distractions, things used by both sides to energize their base while avoiding the fundamental issue of economic power and class conflict.
Which leads us to something quite alarming in his analysis.
Yeah.
His warnings about Christian fascism.
Yes, this is a major concern for him. Yeah. He worries that the combination of the liberal class's failures and the economic devastation caused by corporate power, particularly on the working class, creates fertile ground for what he explicitly calls Christian fascism in the U.S.
What does he mean by that? What are the signs he points to?
He looks at the way national symbols, like the flag, are increasingly merged with Christian symbols and rhetoric.
Okay.
The identification of an internal enemy, immigrants, liberals, socialists, whoever who gets blamed for the country's problems, and also the creation of martyrs for the cause. He mentions Ashley Babbitt, for instance.
A kind of religious nationalism with an authoritarian edge.
Exactly. A potent mix of religious fundamentalism and aggressive, often exclusionary nationalism.
And he sees historical parallels here. He doesn't think this is totally new.
No, he explicitly compares the current climate to Weimar Germany before the Nazis took power. He cites historians like Fritz Stern, who fled Germany and warned about blending religion and extreme nationalism. And he echoes people like Noam Chomsky, who've noted the parallels between the disillusionment with parliamentary democracy in Weimar Germany and the deep distrust many Americans feel towards their own political institutions today.
It really feels like running through all of this is the idea of class, the importance of understanding class divisions.
Absolutely fundamental. Hedges argues that the elites want us to ignore class. They benefit when we're divided by cultural issues instead of uniting around shared economic interests.
Right.
He constantly brings it back to the fact that philosophers throughout history, Aristotle, Marx, understood this basic antagonism between the interests of the wealthy elite and the interests of everyone else.
So we've covered a lot of ground here unpacking Hedges' framework. If you had to boil it down, what's the single most important takeaway for someone listening?
I think the core insight is this. The political noise, the left-right battles we see constantly, they might be masking a deeper fight. A fight within the power structure itself, between different factions of the elite about the best way to run things for their own benefit, the corporate way versus the oligarchic way.
Okay.
Understanding that distinction, Hedges argues, gives you a much sharper lens to analyze what's actually going on, why politicians and corporations act the way they do. It's a critical framework.
Right. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Chris Hedges' perspective, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to carry away. Try applying this framework, corporate power versus oligarchic power, to what you see in the news. How does it help you interpret the actions of different leaders or companies? Where do you see those toll booths Hedges talks about being set up, maybe even in your own life or community? What kind of chaos seems to be benefiting certain groups?
Yeah, it's a powerful lens.
It really is. And this conversation, this deep dive, it's really just scratching the surface of these incredibly complex and often hitting power dynamics.